Hello, my name is Tessa Asquith-Lamb and I'm an artist. I work for the City Arts Centre and other venues, running workshops and also working on the visually impaired programme. In my second video today, I'm going to be showing you an art activity that's inspired by 1920s fashions. So for this you'll need the sketched profile of a 1920s person, some watercolour paints, I've got a palette here, I've got my brush ready and I've got some water. I've also got, for later on, my scissors and glue, some scraps of fabric and ribbon, a few bits of trim, and I've also got some collage paper here and some pens. But first we're going to put some colour onto our 1920s person. Now she's got bobbed hair, which was very fashionable at the time. Not everybody cut their hair really short, but it was very fashionable to do so, to bob your hair or shingle your hair, or even the most extreme was probably the Eton crop, which is a bit like a kind of schoolboy's hairstyle. So I'm just going to mix some quite watery watercolour and do a wash over her face just to get some colour onto this. Now what's nice about this is that this layer of paint here is just a background colour to start us off. So a little bit of colour on there because we're going to be collaging over the top, and then decide what colour hair she's going to have. I'm going to, I think, mix a kind of sandy colour like this. Now it doesn't matter if you go over the edges, the outside edges, because we're going to be cutting her out, which is quite handy. So I'm just going to keep it really kind of loose at the moment. Put a base layer of colour on there. Pick the darker brown, just put a bit of tone through there. Some darker tones, and then I'm going to use that same brown to sort of just go under her chin, maybe under her brow bone and under her nose. So she's getting just a little bit more shading on her face. Now her top, I think I'm going to have as a darkish blue. Again, this is going to be collaged over, but it's nice to have something to work on top of. I'm kind of painting upside down here, so it's a little bit more awkward for me. Let's paint her like this. And you can spend a lot longer just working on her. And then you might want to give her a little bit of makeup. Makeup in the 1920s was becoming more acceptable, but it was still seen as quite risque for some people. The most common colours were kind of really quite bright red lips, blue eyeshadow, bright red nail polish, quite sort of stark by modern standards. I'm going to give her a little bit of a blush there and get my smaller brush and give her some red lips. Nice tip when you're doing lips, if you make the top lip slightly darker than the bottom lip, because that's where the shadow falls. And then I'm going to give her some pale blue eyeshadow. Just a little bit there. How's she looking? Another tip is if you squeeze out the excess water from your brush, you can lift off some of the excess paint that you've put on. It sort of sucks it up. There we go. So this is stage one, and we're going to let that dry and I'll show you the next step. So for stage two, we're going to start with our now dry picture, and we're going to cut her out. So she's already looking quite cool in profile like this. So this is the really fun bit, is when we start adding all these little bits and pieces of collage. So I've got some little scraps of paper here. I love Japanese paper. It's got these beautiful sort of intricate patterns, often with little sprinkles of gold in it. So I've got some little bits of Japanese paper. And what I've done, I've cut two pieces here that are going to fit the collar around here. And this is really when you're starting to design the look of what you're making. So I thought it would be nice if she had this kind of almost Japanese, like a bit like a kimono collar, really. I'm going to start by sticking those on, like this. So you see a lot of that painting that we've done earlier, it's just really forming a background now to these wires. I'll show you that. So we've got a bit of a collar coming on there. And then down here I want a kind of rosette, so I'll show you how to make that. So I've got some toning papers here in sort of bluey greys. And I'm going to cut a kind of rough circle. This, and then a slightly smaller circle. And just see how those look, and then an even smaller circle for the middle. I'm going to layer those up like this and see how that's going to look once I put it down there on top of her dress. Pretty cool. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just snip in from the edges and make a little, I suppose almost like a little flower. I'm just snipping in. I'll show you that. And you can flick those edges up a little bit. And then I'm going to do my next disc, which has got a kind of wave pattern to it. And then this bigger, I might just make that a little bit smaller at that side. And then just snip in from the outside. And this could make a rosette to decorate a bodice or a hairband. Hairbands were very fashionable in the 1920s, quite low on the head, and you get a lot of bridal wreaths that sort of sit quite low on the head in the 1920s. It becomes very fashionable. I suppose it shows off the shortness of your cropped hair. Put a bit of glue on here. I'm just going to layer up my discs like this. It's my little pretty disc, and put this, I'm going to glue this onto her blouse down at the bottom and just flick the edges up a little bit. Because you can make these quite sort of three-dimensional as well. You can a little bit. Looking good. So that's the next sort of collage stage. At this stage you could also think about adding a hat maybe. You could make her a little cloth hat, or you could do a hairband, and I think I'm going to do a hairband on this one, but I'll be showing you some hat options later on. So the next stage is the more intricate trim. So for our final stage we're going to add lots of little details, and this is the really fun bit. So I've already got her in this top with a lovely rosette here, but she's looking quite plain at the top, so it's time to give her some kind of nice hairband. I've got this lovely silver rickrack braid, which is very pretty, and I thought that would make a nice hairband. I'm going to put it quite low down on her head. I'm just going to run some glue across there and stick that across here like that. And the nice thing with this is that you can then just trim the ends to the right length. So there's her hairband, quite low down. And then I think she needs a feather in that, so I'm making a kind of plume. And what I've done is I'm just going to cut tiny feathery snips into the side of a piece of cut paper, really trimming. This is one side. You could use a real feather if you've got a little piece of feather. I quite like paper feathers. If I fold that in the middle as well, it'll give it a bit of a shape, little feathery shape like that. And then I've cut another similar feathery shape And milliners would use heat and steam to shape feathers into, and then they would trim them into shapes. You often see sort of arrow shapes in hats. So these are little plumes, and I'm going to stick one plume on top of the other. There's my little plume. And then I'm going to tuck that, work out where it looks good in her hair. I think it's going to go, I think this. Looks pretty cool. And I've got some little sequins here. And I'm just going to add a few of those. Like a little, almost like a little jewel on her hairband there. Our glue. Just to hold that in place. And then I'm also going to use a similar jewel just to highlight the middle of the rosette on her dress. There. It's looking very cool. And then now it's time to start working into this with some pens. I've got a few different options here. I've got a silvery pen here, which might be nice. I could start by dashing in the lines of a necklace, little thin lines, drawing in some little beads around her neck. And this is the bit where you can really get quite carried away. I'll show you that. So I've just given her a little bit of a chain necklace there. And what about some earrings? And we can work out where your ear is. If you think about where your ear is, and it sort of lines up at the bottom of your lips there, so her ear would be about here. So we could just have visible the start of an earring there. So I'm going to use one of these little sequins as an earring. Pop that in there. And then I could have little drops coming down from that. See? There she is. So all these little embellishments can be really sort of built up and made into something quite elaborate. And I just thought I'd show you a few of my previous examples. So here's a lady in a kind of close-fitting hat, and I've made the hat out of paper and then made another one of those sort of rosettes and cut out some little flowers here, and then I've tied round her neck a little piece of chiffon ribbon like a scarf, and she looks like she's looking optimistically into the future there as a 1920s lady. I've also got another example of this profile. I've given her another Japanese paper collar, and I've given her the same sort of hairband and this soft face, and you can see her necklace there. I really like this one. So this is a lady in a close-fitting, almost like a rounded cloche hat, and she's got long plume-like feathers. So these are snipped out of paper in the same way and attached. And I've used some fabric here, just glued down, and given her this broad collar on her dress. There's something really beautiful about the profiles in these pictures and how they look very sort of sharp and elegant, looking towards the future. So those are our 1920s ladies, which we're going to mount onto black card. I think it works best if you put some black paper behind them, and you can really get this lovely contrast. I'll just show you that one I've just finished against a black background. There she is. So I hope you've enjoyed that today, and have a go at home.